Good evening and welcome to the Fall Story Lab Showcase. My name's Eva Marie Allison with the Sanger Leadership Center, and thank you for tuning in. Tonight, you're going to hear from 5 courageous storytellers who've been crafting their stories for months before taking tonight's virtual stage. And you'll also get to learn how you too can participate in the Story Lab program. At its core, Story Lab's about 2 things: developing the powerful leadership skill of effective communication, and strengthening an inclusive community. StoryLab helps participants harness the power of storytelling to communicate with impact, form stronger connections, and bring people together. As humans, we've been using storytelling to effectively share ideas, beliefs, and values from one generation to the next for centuries. So whether it's been around a campfire, our dinner tables, or in this modern Zoom webinar, stories bring people together. Listening to a story is an opportunity to get curious, hear out new perspectives, relate to others, to laugh, cry, laugh so hard that we cry. And it also gives us a chance to be present with each other and give our minds a much needed break from all of our daily stressors, especially now more than ever. So we hope that you take us up on that and be present with us tonight. Now, before we jump into our program, there's a few housekeeping items that we'd like to discuss. You'll notice that there's closed captioning available for tonight's program. So you can toggle that feature on or off by using the CC button on the bottom of your screen. We've also enabled chat. And so during the storytelling portion of our program tonight, we would love for you to share that support and affirmations for our courageous storytellers. Lastly, following tonight's program, immediately after, Wellness at Ross is going to host a post Story Lab reflection session where you can unpack your experience in small groups with your peers. So stick around after the event. We'll be shooting you the link to that session then. Now, Story Lab is brought to you in partnership with the Design Plus Business Club. So at this time, I would like to introduce you to Stephanie Simpson, who is our Vice President of Story Lab with Design Plus Business, to share more about what Story Lab has meant to her. So at this time, please welcome Stephanie Simpson.
Thanks, Eva Marie. Hi, everyone. This is my 3rd year being a part of the Story Lab planning team. And one of the reasons that I was gravitated to this event, even before I became a Ross student, was I thought it was really a standout event that really helped build a caring and compassionate Ross community that is pretty famous and well known. And as soon as I came to campus, I could immediately understand why. It's really altering to hear your classmates, whether you've just seen them in the halls or they're a good friend, get up on stage and be vulnerable and tell you these personal stories. And even along the way, sometimes you learn new things about them and about the world. And this year, it looks a little different. Our storytellers kind of get up on the stage, but I really do think that even through a Zoom screen or a computer screen, that we can build those empathetic connections with our classmates and with the broader community. So I'm really excited that you all are here today and to hear the amazing stories from our speakers. Back to you, Eva Marie.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. We appreciate your perspective. All right, now let's recap how Story Lab even works. So we're going to review our program menu. Now, hopefully you got a chance to tune into our kickoff at the beginning of the school year. And from there, students went on to attend our Story Lab retreat. So all of the storytellers that you're going to hear tonight, this is where they landed, where they were able to learn how to both craft and deliver a compelling story. From there, they also had an opportunity to attend our Communities Connections event, where they got to continue to workshop their stories in small groups with their peers. From there, select participants then applied to tonight's showcase, received one-on-one communication coaching from our expert storyteller coaches to perfect their stories in preparation for tonight's program. Now, this whole process is going to repeat come this winter. So whether you are an undergrad, a graduate student, Ross student, or not, we welcome all of you to sign up for our winter retreats this coming February. So look out for more information coming to your inbox in the new year, or you can also visit our website at sanger.umich.edu to learn more about StoryLab program and how you can sign up and get involved. Okay, and now what we're here for are 5 featured storytellers. As I mentioned earlier, creating a community of support is core to the StoryLab program. So in that spirit, we want to share with you some ground rules of what that can look like in our space tonight. First, what's shared at StoryLab stays at StoryLab. So what you're going to hear tonight is going to be personal. So we want to respect the confidentiality of our storytellers. So please refrain from sharing what you hear tonight outside of this event. Secondly, we encourage those shout outs. Those are highly welcome. So be engaged throughout this program. It takes a lot of courage for our students to step up and go through this process and take the StoryLab stage. So we totally encourage you to use the chat box feature to share your affirmations and excitement and support for our storytellers. So please do that. Thirdly, be present and listen fully. Close out those other windows, silence your phones, and really use this as an opportunity to be present and let those stressors be left at that virtual door, so to say. So listening is an active skill, so we welcome you to engage in it. And then lastly, adopt a growth mindset. You'll be hearing 5 different storytellers, each who have 5 unique life experiences. So as you listen, get curious. What new perspectives or insights might you gain from this experience? So thank you in advance for helping us create this community of support. And now, without further ado, we'd like to welcome our first storyteller.
I'm headed to Minnesota. Sports has always been a strong bond for my family. I distinctly remember summer evenings in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, going to the local baseball stadium and watching the minor league baseball team and being able to take pictures with the mascot and run around the bases after the game. This brought so much joy and excitement to me and my family. And when it came to going to college and thinking about what I wanted to do for my long-term career, I thought back to those experiences that I had with my family and decided that I wanted to provide similar memorable experiences to young kids and their families. So when it came to my senior year of college, my goal was to get a full-time job in the sports industry. I had many internships throughout college and sports. I was at a top undergraduate business school, and I had an okay GPA. So I applied to a number of different job opportunities, but one I was exceptionally excited about was a rotational program with the NBA at their league office headquarters in New York City. It was my dream to live in New York City, the hub of sports and entertainment, go to work in downtown Manhattan. And this job opportunity, this rotational program would provide me that opportunity. It was a 2-year program. And at the end of the 2 years, I'll be hired on full time. So after going through a few phone interviews, I was invited to the final round interview and flown out to New York City, put up in a nice hotel in downtown Manhattan. I had the opportunity that evening when I flew in to walk around the city and feel that buzz. And I felt like this is the place that I want to be. And so the next morning I woke up with excitement and I didn't want to feel overconfident, but I felt really good about my chances to have great interviews and to land this job. So it was a long day of interviews, and I felt good afterwards and got back on the plane and headed back to school. After a few weeks had gone by, I got a little nervous about whether I had done enough to get that job opportunity and whether I was qualified. But about 3 weeks after I had interviewed, I got a phone call and I looked down at it and it was a New York City area code. I picked up and said, "Hello, this is Steven Anderson." And the woman on the other line, the recruiter, said, "Steven, we unfortunately will not be able to offer you a position in the program for this year." And I just sunk. I had always gotten a job offer for any job opportunity that I had interviewed for, and had not felt this type of discouragement and not being able to reach my goal. The recruiter, I'm sure, said a number of sentences and encouraging words afterwards. I don't really remember any of that. After hanging up the phone, I sat in my room and obviously felt really discouraged and didn't really know how to react to these emotions. But I got back up and was determined again to make sure that I fulfilled my goal of getting a full-time job in sports after graduation. So I continued to apply to a number of jobs, but wasn't getting any traction, wasn't getting invited to interviews. And at this point, it was towards the end of January in the school year, and graduation was just a few months away. Many of my classmates in my business school started to get their jobs and were talking to me about their excitement. And I wanted to reciprocate that back to them, but I still wasn't at my goal. So desperation, I felt, started to set in. I reached out to my career services advisor and started looking at job opportunities and marketing that were outside of sports. After looking at these opportunities, I knew I wasn't passionate about them and decided to again refocus my efforts towards getting that full-time job in sports. I started to apply for jobs that I wasn't really qualified for and wasn't really even passionate about, but I just wanted to get the feeling of getting a job offer, no matter what opportunity in sports it was. And so I ended up getting a few internship offers, but was still short of my goal of getting that full-time offer. Towards the beginning of April, I got an email from the Minnesota Vikings asking if I wanted to interview for a full-time role in their sponsorship department. And I had applied for this role about a month prior and really didn't think that I would even get a call back. But of course, I jumped at the opportunity. And again, after a few phone interviews, I was flown to Minneapolis, Minnesota for the final round interview. I again had the same excitement and buzz and didn't want to feel too overconfident. But after my final round interview and talking to the executives and the team that I had the chance to be a part of, I felt that I had a good opportunity to get this job. A few weeks after I had interviewed came graduation. And the day of graduation, the excitement was lessened by still not having that full-time job offer. After the graduation ceremony, I went out to dinner with my family, my then fiance, her family. And in the back of my head, I was just thinking and hoping to get a call or an email from the Minnesota Vikings giving me the good news. And so right as I was biting into my first, my entree, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Again, looked down at it and saw a Minnesota area code. I excused myself from the table, went outside, and picked up the phone and said, hello, this is Steven Anderson, and got the great news and excitement from the recruiter saying, we would like to offer you a position with the Minnesota Vikings. I couldn't contain my excitement and continued to just show how excited I was to the recruiter on the phone. And after the conversation, walked back into the restaurant, sat back down with my family, and said, I'm headed to Minnesota.
Imagine the opposite of a Michigan winter. Hot, humid, sticky. That's what I felt as I stepped out of the U.S. Embassy vehicle in Douala, Cameroon after Dr. Grace Dion. Dr. Dion was a Cameroonian doctor working for the U.S. Department of Defense, and I was on my third week of my U.S. Department of State internship. She was cool and professional, and I was sweating through my shirt. We were there because she was going to give a presentation advocating for LGBT and commercial sex worker rights in hospital settings. We were at a hospital, a military hospital in Douala, which is a coastal city in Cameroon in Central Africa. But before she was to give her presentation, the hospital administrators wanted to take us on a tour. So we followed them around the hospital as they showed us the different specialties. And the way the hospital was laid out was each specialty was in a small blue and white building, and they were all separated by concrete sidewalks on a large grassy plot of land. And we went from specialty to specialty as they told her about the way the hospital worked out there. And finally, we arrived at the last building, which was the HIV/AIDS building. In my internship with the State Department, I had been assigned to PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a U.S. program. And so I was very interested to see this building. And as I looked at it, I was a little confused because it was different than the rest, not in the way that it appeared, but in the fact that there were several dozen people waiting outside. And I wasn't sure why they were waiting. I wasn't clear what was happening there that was different than at the other clinics. And Dr. Dion asked this of the hospital administrators. There were probably 30 people gathered there, some sitting on wooden benches inside, some standing, some spilling out into the hot and humid midday sun. And Dr. Dion was asking, what's going on here? Why are there people waiting here? And they explained that these patients were waiting for their antiretroviral medication. And for those who don't know, antiretrovirals, or ARVs, are medications that essentially turn an HIV diagnosis from a death sentence into something that people can live with, and they allow patients to protect their families and their loved ones from the disease. So it's an absolutely essential medication. They need this medication to stay alive. And what the hospital administrators explained, as Dr. Dion chatted in her rapid French with them, was that these patients could only come one time per week. That was the only time the clinic was open. So they could get a monthly supply of the ARVs, but the clinic was only open once a week. So that's why you got this huge backlog and bottleneck at this location. And that felt really wrong to me. I wasn't clear why it was only open one day a week, what the reason was for that. And as Dr. Dion and I turned to speak with some of the patients, we turned to this woman dressed in this gorgeous, colorful, multi-patterned dress. And she was standing there outside the clinic. And Dr. Dion was chatting with her. And the woman mentioned that she had been waiting for 9 hours to get her medication. She was waiting 9 hours to get this medication that she couldn't live without. And she mentioned a little later in the conversation offhand that she had come from over a day's journey away to get there. And as I was just sitting there and processing what she was saying, I was trying to put myself in her shoes, and I couldn't imagine taking days out of every month, a day to get there, a day to wait for your medication, and a day to get back, 3 days out of every month away from my work, away from my child, my children, my childcare, away from my friends and my family and my leisure time. 3 days every month because I had no choice, because I had to get this life-saving medication. And not only that, I was trying to imagine the heat of judgment that some of these patients faced as they stood outside waiting, essentially publicly outing themselves as being HIV positive in a society that sees that as a stain of dishonor. And honestly, as I tried to put myself in her shoes as much as I could, I was really angry. I found myself really feeling this deep sense of injustice and unfairness. And I felt this tension rising in my chest. I was so frustrated that these were the conditions under which these patients were getting this essential medication. And I just kept coming back to the feeling that, healthcare shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't involve days-long interruptions to your life and conditions that fail to dignify its patients. I couldn't stop thinking about it after we went to the hotel that night, and I continued to think about it as we went back to the embassy a few days later, and I really haven't stopped thinking about it since. So after that, fast forward 4 years, and I'm working with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Chicago. I'm working with the Chicago Department of Public Health's immunization program. And typically, I was doing large-scale programmatic work to help get lots of people vaccinated. But every now and then I would fill in as a clerk at one of the free clinics, helping patients fill out paperwork and consent forms. And I loved that work because most of the time I was in my office, doing work on a computer, helping plan things. But being in the clinic, I really got to see patients and interact with them and talk to the people that I was hopefully helping with the work I was doing in my office. But that's not to say that the environment itself was very inspiring. If you picture a free clinic, think of, beige walls, just glaring fluorescent lights, hard plastic chairs, and posters from the 90s that haven't been updated yet. So like I said, not very inspiring. But the thing that really was inspiring were the parents and the patients that would come through the doors, find this clinic, and would sit sometimes for hours waiting to get vaccinated. I saw parents shaking rattles for their babies to get them to calm down, pushing strollers up and down hallways again and again, struggling to decipher this paperwork in a language that they didn't speak, taking time off of work. A lot of these parents didn't have jobs that gave them paid time off. So they were not getting paid for the hours they were sitting in this waiting room. They've pulled their children out of school to accommodate the clinic's 9 to 3 p.m. hours. So it's a huge inconvenience. It's a, hurdle after hurdle that these parents have to overcome just to protect their kids from many deadly diseases and make sure that their kids can go to school uninterrupted. And I couldn't stop thinking again, if that was me, I would be so exhausted and I would be angry, angry that there are so many hurdles and obstacles that I have to surmount just to get an immunization for my child. This isn't primary care. This isn't comprehensive by any means. This is a 5-minute immunization to get your child up to date on their shots. And at the end, the patients would walk back out and they would thank us, because we were the only place that a lot of them could get health care. A lot of them were uninsured or didn't have high quality health insurance. And so we were really their only resort. And I kept thinking, again, healthcare shouldn't be this hard. So across very different geographies and climates, from the heat and humidity of Cameroon to the frigid climate of Chicago, I saw patients, and particularly low-income patients, have to put up with unacceptable and undignifying conditions just to get basic life-saving care. Of course, I admire their resilience. I admire their determination. It's amazing what they did to keep themselves and their families and their children protected and safe and healthy. They're truly resilient, but they shouldn't have to be. I don't think you should have to be that determined and that resilient just to get absolutely basic care. And what I saw and that deep sense of injustice that I felt in both of those settings, that's what's motivating me now to help expand health access to populations, particularly low-income populations, and allow everyone to receive dignifying healthcare. Because at the end of the day, what I saw in Cameroon and what I saw in Chicago, neither of those were acceptable. Healthcare shouldn't be this hard. Healthcare should be dignifying. And that's why I want to be a part of making it both dignifying, simple, and easy to access. Thank you.
When my plane touched down in Europe, a slew of Venmo notifications from strangers came through. $35 for the easel, $20 for the bookshelf, $5 for the sketchbook. It was a log of everything I owned being claimed by people I'd never met before. And that's because on the day I'd left Boston, I'd set up an outdoor store. I strung bulb lights and set up these decorative plants and hung a sign that said, "Pay what you think is fair," and it included my Venmo handle. And those Venmo payments went towards the cost of my one-way flight from stability and comfort to uncertainty and newness. It was June of 2019. I was 26 years old, and I was embarking on a sabbatical. And I use those air quotes very deliberately because I recognize that a sabbatical is a privilege typically reserved for tenured professors. For me, the sabbatical was the chance to answer a question I had been avoiding answering since childhood. And strangely enough, it was the question that the stewardess asked me as she watched me draw on this coffee cup while we waited for the gate to open. She asked, "Are you an artist?" This decision to pursue art full-time was not an easy one for me. It was accompanied by a laundry list of fears. Would the praise that had validated me as an artist throughout childhood, still be there when I was measured up against real artists? I had quit my job and left behind people that I loved in pursuit of something more, which is an incredibly lucky thing to be able to do. And I really felt the need to justify that decision by producing art that year, unlike anything I'd ever produced before. So, anticipating that this year was not going to look anything like my previous 25 years, I felt like I really needed to hit the reset button in a significant way. I spent the first 40 days walking 500 miles from France across northern Spain to the Atlantic coast. The Camino is a trail that has its roots in a religious pilgrimage, but it attracts people from all over the world for very different reasons. Everyone starts out in this small town in France right over the border, and you're given a passport that you collect stamps in along the way, and those stamps allow you to stay in the pilgrim hostels for free or for cheap. And so at the start, a guy gave me a passport, put my first stamp in, and said Buen Camino, which literally means good path, but basically means good journey. On the Camino, your bag really isn't supposed to weigh more than like 15 pounds, which it turns out is not a lot. For me, it was a couple pairs of shorts, a couple t-shirts, rain jacket, sweatshirt, toiletries, a first aid kit for blisters, and art supplies. But the night before embarking, I was sharing a room with this guy from Brazil who had done the Camino 2 times before. He looked at my bag and he was like, "You got to cut more of this." He was repeating this mantra, ounces make pounds, ounces make pounds. And as I looked at the items that I had in my bag, it was very clear what I needed to leave behind. I was barely a day into my new life as an artist, and now I had to leave behind the only things I could use to make art. The first day of the Camino is a 16-mile traverse in the Pyrenees, for which I had not trained at all. I remember like standing on this mountain with a beautiful, expansive view, but my legs were shaking, my stomach was growling, and it was so clear I was very unprepared for this. I had also decided that I was going to be completely tech-free on the Camino. No music, no podcasts, nothing. And on that first day, too scared to face the silence, I was singing Silent Night out loud over and over in June because I truly did not know how to just be with myself. And I think that song came out because I really hadn't heard my inner voice since childhood. And so a bunch of childhood memories started surfacing, including one where a teacher was standing over me looking at a bicycle I had drawn, and she asked, "Are you an artist?" And I looked at what I had drawn, knew it could be better, knew it wasn't in some fancy gallery or art magazine. And so I looked back up at her and gave her the answer that I would give my entire life. No, I don't think so. At the end of that first day of the Camino, I arrived into this small Spanish town feeling very discouraged. I had already accumulated these, what I was calling inception blisters. It's basically like a blister in a blister in a blister. And there was this sort of carousel of thoughts circulating where I was thinking about like all that I had invested to coming here and really not feeling confident that it would yield anything at all. But I had to wake up and do it over and over again each day. And each morning, the hostel owners send you off with this like annoyingly cheery and ever consistent "Buen Camino." So I packed up my bag, bandaged my blisters, and set out on the trail every day, day after day after day. At several points along the walk, I physically had to let things go and leave pieces of what I thought was me behind. It was a sort of sacrificial tax in order to keep walking. And then there was like the stripping away of another level. It was the noise, other people's opinions, affiliations to place, people, organizations, groups, jobs. All of it was lost in the sound of my shoes on the ground, keeping time with the sound of my voice, which was a lot harsher and a lot more self-critical. Some days I really resented having to walk with myself, and I was probably the worst companion to walk alongside. 2 weeks in, my blisters turned to calluses and my bag started to feel like an extension of myself. I learned how to view it as part of me instead of as a burden. I learned when I needed to take a break, when to push myself. And by abandoning my belongings, my expectations, and my art supplies that I thought were so essential to the purpose of this trip, I started to lean in to my instincts and needs. The sound of my inner voice became clearer and more pronounced and gentler. And I started to hear a voice I came to identify as my inner artist that was able to draw connections between disparate things, identify patterns, and visualize things not actually seen in the real world. I came to realize how intensely I paid attention to some things. On one day, I spent 10 miles thinking about whether I could teach myself music theory because I understood color theory. Basically, I was thinking, could I overlay a color wheel with the circle of fifths and assign notes to certain colors? And if I can understand, complementary colors, could I come to understand harmonious music notes? And the further I walked, the more art started to take a new meaning in my mind. It became more of an exercise or a process, or for my fellow business school friends, a framework. And with each mile walked, my idea of the sabbatical year to follow was refined and reframed to orient myself around this idea of paying attention versus seeking attention. And as I struggled to sort of articulate this newfound realization, I was offered a serendipitous shortcut by an engraving that was on a rock alongside the trail, which said, "We are human beings, not human doings." And I was beginning to see myself as an artist because of what was in my head, not in my hand. How I think about and process the world, not how much or how fast I can produce something. And art was becoming disentangled from production and valuation by others. And so I made a commitment to myself that instead of worrying about who would pay for my work or what would get featured in an art magazine, every day I was going to ask myself the following questions. What do I want to give my attention to today? What am I genuinely curious about today? What would I make even if I was the only person that was going to lay eyes on this thing? When I reached the end of the Camino, there was a census of sorts. A woman took my passport, looked over my stamps, asked me a series of questions. Country of origin, day you started the Camino, religious affiliation, and the last question, what's your profession? And I paused, and I looked at her and I said, I'm an artist.
Hi, it was the summer of 2016. Me and my wife Shipra Goyal were in Florida. She was presenting a paper in a conference on virology and she was very excited by what she saw. What she saw was cutting edge equipment, a lot of funding and impetus for clinical research, and she was enamored. She told me, I can't stop but wonder about what could have been. You know what, Asim? Back in 2011, I was supposed to come here to do a clerkship, and I'm thinking I might have been a US physician by now, with access to all these resources. So I told her, do you want to do something about it? And she said, whatever do you mean? I told her, do you want to pursue a US residency now? Do you want to give MLE and do that? And she started laughing. She said, Asim, I am doing a residency. You are working here. We're not going to uproot to a foreign country on a whim. And both of us thought that would be the end of it. Over the next 3 years, me, my wife, and my dog. My dog Leo is a German Shepherd who's huge, but he thinks he's a puppy, which makes for some funny incidents. And we built our life in Delhi, and we were well settled. We joined running community, and we ran multiple half marathons. We did a lot of stuff, and we thought we were well settled back in Delhi. And then early in 2019, something seemed to shift. At a point when my wife was struggling to get funding for her medical research, she was selected as an international ambassador by the Society for Healthcare and Epidemiology of America. The contrast could not have been more stark. While we were celebrating her achievement, I told her, Shipra, do you recall that conversation we had way back in 2016? Do you want to revisit that? And she said, do you mean like uprooting our life here and moving to the US, me giving all those exams? I said, yeah, that's what I mean. I've been thinking about it. I also want to pivot to something where I can work with healthcare as well so that I can make a more meaningful contribution. She said, Asim, but what about the plan we have? We were supposed to start a family in the sense that we're supposed to have kids soon. And I told her, we are a family, and if we have kids, by sacrificing our dreams, you're going to resent them. And that's not what you want. So we decided, okay, we'll go ahead with this. We'll think about it in a month and decide. We thought about it for a month and decided to go ahead. The next 1.5 years have been really tough. We have had to give lots of exams, but the tougher part has been staying apart. Staying in different continents, different time zones is not easy. And along with the added stress of all the exams, it has been a tough time. We have all these cheesy traditions where we go out to celebrate a lot of anniversaries, like the anniversary of our first meeting. We go to the same Starbucks every day, every year, sit in the same booth, order the same coffee. And this year, as well as last year, I had to do it alone. That was tough. These small things give you joy, and missing those was tough for us. But then in the beginning of 2020, things seemed to be falling into place. My wife had an offer to do a fellowship. I was interviewing with my top choice MBA schools, and then COVID happened. COVID threw a spanner into our works, and we were left scrambling. We were stuck in different continents. We did not have any means to get to each other, and for a while, we just felt lost. We finally managed to get a flight, and as my wife flew to India, she had to be quarantined for a week after landing in Delhi. And I still remember the moment I met her after that quarantine. We hugged like it had been years apart, not just a few months. That's what it felt like anyway. And you know what? At that point, again, we thought now things will be smooth. And then the entire struggle of getting my dog to the US was such a humongous task, getting him prepared for it. And during COVID times, with all the restrictions, bringing him to the US itself was a challenge. Finally, we managed to do it. And I remember the day he landed in JFK and we went to receive him. That was such an emotional moment. I'll never forget that sight or that memory for my entire life. He was crazily jumping around both of us. We were both weeping with joy, and it was just one of the best memories of my life. Over the next 2 months, we both got busy with our lives again, and things seemed to be normalizing. It's a human tendency. We get into our routines and forget about the journey. But I do want to share that, the journey has been tough, but the company has been great, and I'm really glad to be here. Something which really brought it home for me was like a couple of weeks ago, I was in Buffalo and it started snowing. I took my dog out for a walk for his first experience of a snowfall. And he was like so excited. He saw it and he was trying to catch snow on his tongue and he was like making these weird faces and I just couldn't stop smiling. And then it sunk in. We have made it. The journey has been really tough. The decisions we have had to take, the separation we've had to face, that has all been tough. But here we are, starting off a new journey. That's the message I want to share. It's never too late to begin again. And despite what your age or circumstances may be, if you are intent on doing something, go for it. Thank you.
Wow, let's give a big round of applause for our brave storytellers this evening. Thank you all for showcasing your skills, enriching our community. Your stories are powerful. So if you haven't done so already, let's give them some love in that chat feed. Thank you for all who have been joining in and sharing your support and affirmations for all of our storytellers tonight. And thank you for tuning in. Be on the lookout for more information about how you can get involved in Story Lab this winter. But in the meantime, we'd love to hear about your experience. So we're going to be dropping a link into the chat box right now with a very quick feedback survey. Your feedback matters to us, so thank you in advance for sharing it. Lastly, as we wrap up tonight, we want to give a special thank you to Steve and Karen Sanger, who make Story Lab and all of Sanger's programming possible. So thank you to the Sangers. And now we're going to pull some music back up, but stick around because Wellness at Ross is hosting a reflection session where if you want to have more time to connect with your peers in small groups to unpack what you heard tonight, we're going to be also sharing a link in the chat so that you can join that event. So look for those links in the chat box now. Thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you at a future Story Lab program. Be well and have a great night.